Now let's do the third principle that we're going to do this week. We did opportunity cost, we did the net benefit principle. Now we're going to do the third principle. The first two have to do more with the individual decision making. This one has to do more with what is the result of those individual decision making at the society level. I'm going to call this principle, I'm going to call it the invisible hand principle. And I'm going to tell you why we're going to call it that way in a second. The idea of the principle is that when people behave to try to do the better for themselves, when everyone follows the net benefit principle that we discussed in the previous principle, then society benefits from it. That's in general what it means, right? Now, again, I think the best way to prove these things is to give you an example. Because again, as with the other principles, it looks a lot easier when you put the definition than when you try to apply it. Say you don't own a car, and you cannot buy a new car. The only thing you can do is to rent a car. And you have only two options to rent. You have an old car that costs you about $100 per year, and it gives you about 20 miles per gallon. Or you can rent a newer car, which costs you more up front, $600 per year, but it gives you more miles per gallon because it's newer, so you can go farther with a tank than the other one, 40 miles per gallon. And to make the situation simple, let's assume that the cost of gasoline is $1 per gallon. Again, gas doesn't matter where you live, probably you have to pay more for gasoline, but this is just for simplicity. It wouldn't make later on we change the numbers. And then furthermore, let's say that the driving distance in every year you drive on average 7,000 miles. And finally, let's make an assumption to make this even more interesting, that your main goal in life is to reduce the total amount of fossil fuels used in the world. If this is the situation, which car should you rent? The old car or the new car? Why don't you take a moment, calculate any numbers you need to calculate, and then try to make a decision. And I'll give you a few seconds, and then we go over the answer. Okay, so what do? Well, I bet that if this is the case with most of my students, you probably answered the new car. I would say that, in my opinion, the best answer is the old car. And you probably say, well, how can you answer the old car when the new car only uses a lot less fuels because it actually gives you more miles per gallon? Well, I bet that in your answer you assume that if you didn't rent the old car was not going to be rented by anyone. And I think it's a pretty strong assumption, and I didn't actually make that assumption, so we'll have to talk a little bit about this. So let's calculate the numbers to talk about this before we move any further. I calculated a number here beforehand for you. And by the way, we're using gallons, which is a standard of measure used in the US, but the answer wouldn't change if you actually use a different measure or a different unit of a measure. Okay, so the costs of the old car are straightforward, $100 up front, and then the next cost has to do with the miles you drive. You drive 7,000 miles. Each gallon costs you $1. So in total, in a year, you will spend $450 in this car. The new car, actually you spend a little more because it's more cost up front. Even though it gives you more miles per gallon, the costs up front are quite high. So in the end, you spend $775. And like I said, if I were going to behave according to the principles, and even if my main goal was to reduce the total amount of fossil fuels, I will go for the old car because it's cheaper, $450. Now, again, most of you probably say, well, but that's not true because if you go for the new car, then you're spending a lot less fossil fuels. But remember that my stipulation, not that you would try to reduce the fossil fuels you consume, but the fossil fuels in general, the total amount of fossil fuels. And wouldn't we, if the old car have to be rented by someone, wouldn't it be better if that old car is rented by someone who doesn't drive very much, and the new car are rented by people who drive a lot? Right? So if both cars are going to be rented, right, and there's no reason to think that they won't, then because there might be people out there who doesn't have the same principle as you have, right? There's people out there who might not really care about the environment or about the fossil fuels. But if people actually behave according to their cost benefits, if individual person behave according to their own cost and benefit, the individual cost and benefits, people who drive a lot will go for the new car, and people who don't drive a lot, in the case you, 7,000, will go for the old car, right? In the extreme, you can think that someone who actually doesn't drive at all, if I don't drive at all, which car should be better? Well, clearly, if I don't drive at all, it doesn't matter which car I rent because I'm not going to spend any fossil fuels. But if I don't drive at all and I want to take one of the cars out of circulation, I'll probably want to take the old car. So I don't give a chance to someone who drives a lot to rent it. So if I have to have one car in my garage and never use it, I want to have a car that uses a lot of mileage per gallon, because that way someone else who drives more than me cannot use that car. So that's the idea, right? So what is happening here is that if each individual person chooses according to their own individual costs and benefits, society as a whole would actually use the less amount of fossil fuels. Now, I'm sure you have many, many questions, and that's great, because the most questions I was able to encourage, the better, right? A lot of these questions we won't be able to answer here. We'll answer in the discussion. But I'll try to go over some of those questions, right? Well, one clear question is, well, the cost of gasoline is not $1, it's really more. Well, perfect, right? In this class, what we're going to do is we're going to try to recreate reality with numbers that are simple at the beginning, right, like we're doing right now. And then we can understand things a lot better. And then we can complicate things. Once we understand, we can complicate it. So this is a perfect example right here. If the cost of gasoline, instead of being $1, was $4, now if you change the cost now, you will see that if the cost of gasoline is $4, probably the new car becomes a bargain for someone who drives 7,000 miles. And someone who drives 7,000 miles would probably go for the new car instead of the old car. So this is the first clue as to what is the best way to encourage people to drive cars that consume less gasoline, is to increase the price. Because when the price goes to $4, most people, behaving individuals, are going to make the individual choice of choosing cars that don't consume any gasoline. The government don't have to tell people which cars to choose. They only have to the price only have to change, or in other words, the government could simply change the price, and that would let people behave on their own, and they will, by behaving on their own, get the cars that consume less gasoline. Now, another very simple example of this principle, right? So I call it the invisible hand, because it's not like everyone is pushing anyone to do something, but it's like an invisible hand pushing society to do the best by each individual person doing what is best for themselves. And this is what Adam Smith said, the father of economics, more than 200 years ago, when he published his work in 1776, right? And that's, he called it the invisible hand, so we're calling it the invisible hand. But think about another very simple example. Let's go to, we're going to introduce later on the course. You go to a movie theater, you go to a grocery store, and there's different, you have a choice of which line to put yourself on, and you have like 3 different cashiers. Which one you choose? Well, you usually choose the one that has the less number of people. And everyone behaves like you, because they all want to get to the movie or to buy their stuff in the fastest amount of time. So everyone behaving selfishly, trying to reduce their own time, the result of that is that everyone as a whole gets out of the place or into the movie in the fastest amount of time. You don't have a person at the grocery store leading people into the different lines. All you need to do is to assume that every person will actually try to get out of the grocery store in the fastest amount of time. And if the system is well in place, if you have enough cash register, and the signs are clear to where everyone has to go, then the society will be able to do the best. So this is a principle. I don't want you to believe me right now, right? If you don't have to. This is one that we're going to come back time after time, because it's a critical one. But it's one at the center of what we call capitalism, capitalist societies today, with the fact that if we make societies free, then each individual action will create the most social welfare. So we come back to this one, and I'll give you more time to discuss these things in the discussion forums. Again, the more you should be skeptical, the more questions we have, the best. We have one more principle to do, and that's trade. Let's do that next.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.